Hi, welcome to TOTE Talks. My name is Samantha Ullum, and I am the Light Art Rep for the Midwest region. I am here with Mark, the Director of Innovation and Research from M+A Architects. Mark, would you like to give a little snippet about yourself?
Sure. So like Sam said, I am the Director of Innovation and Research for M+A Architects. We are a multidisciplinary firm here in Columbus, Ohio. And I started off as a designer, graduating from Virginia Tech with a design degree, and then moving to Columbus in 2004, and have worked at a plethora of different firms, landing at M+A back in 2008. And then, no, that was wrong, 2012.
Perfect.
And then basically just have worked my way up through workplace design, multifamily, just always having a love and a passion for learning and research. And then that just has evolved into my current role now as the Director of Innovation and Research.
That's awesome. So interesting. I had no idea you went to Virginia Tech. That's awesome.
Hokey through and through.
I love that.
That's why I'm loving these orange.
Right, we're very on
chairs.
brand in the Tote Lounge.
Yep.
That's great. Do you have some people that you can kind of think of offhand that inspired you to kind of go down the path to get you where you are now?
Absolutely. So what I would say is that, I mean, if we had the time, I could probably talk about each of my individual bosses, but I think from the very get-go, I've had mentors and bosses who have acted as people who want to support me and they want to see me thrive. And so like my current boss is Carrie Boyd. She was just named managing principal at M+A Architects, awesome. Transitioning from the design director role. And she just basically, when she interviewed me, said, you know, there are going to be days where you're going to be doing design. There may be days you're working on a site plan. There may be days you're working on an exterior elevation. And it's just going to all roll into one. And then, like I said, as my career started to evolve, she's definitely helped me to push the boundaries and helped give me goals. So Carrie Boyd, definitely. And then Rebecca Matheny is a professor at OSU here. And so she and I just have a very much of a love of like learning and research too. And so she and I had a conversation about 4 or 5 years ago about research that really started to spur me into this direction.
Yeah.
And then Royce Epstein, who's the director of design at Mohawk. I was fortunate enough to go with the Mohawk rep at the time to see her at a Mohawk future workplace design seminar, and there were trend forecasters there and futurists there, and so that just kind of again spurred me onto this whole wanting to incorporate more research and foresight into the practice.
That's so fascinating. Like what I think about, you know, being a student and like going through the education process and doing, you know, you're going to your studio classes and you're doing all that, never in a million years would I think I would be sitting where I'm sitting, let alone the path that you kind of built for yourself. What's kind of one thing as, you know, you look back on your years as a student that you kind of wish you would have known or would have had like the foresight to kind of tell yourself as a student, like, this is what's possible?
Well, so I think as a student, we all have these big dreams. And so I think you definitely want to make sure that you hold on to those dreams and document those dreams, because I'm a firm believer of if you don't write the goals down, they're not going to happen.
Sure.
But what I would probably tell myself now is that there's a quote from President Roosevelt that comparison is the thief of all joy. And I feel like our industry is very comparison heavy.
Sure.
We
absolutely.
are just like social media in that we are looking at all of these things that are out there that have filters and they're nuanced and they're so focused in on the tight little detail that we work ourselves into a frenzy, I think, to try to capture that and try to be that versus just allowing ourselves to enjoy the process and to enjoy the creations that we come up with.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, if I were to tell students these days, I'd say, enjoy what you do, love what you do. Don't do it to try to compare yourself to other people.
For sure. And it's so hard. Like that's such a hard place to be at. And I feel like even more in this pandemic, I feel like that has become so much more the forefront. And especially for a lot of us too, that our lives weren't really digitally held before that. At least I can pretty confidently say I didn't use Instagram as like a tool to like get new clients until now, which is, it's both fun, but it's also that reality of it's so manicured and it's so strategic on like what we see. Speaking of COVID, I feel like we should at least like not just completely gloss over that we've been in a global pandemic for a year. How have you kind of seen the landscape change? You know, I'm sure it went through its own peaks and valleys. How was your experience during this last year?
So my experience was very interesting in that when the pandemic hit, so as a futurist, I was immediately like, okay, this is going to be good. And then I immediately felt bad about that because I, don't think I did not think a pandemic is good. What I think is good about it is that it provides an opportunity for change.
Yeah.
And so we call that an inflection point in history where we're basically going to something completely different that we've ever been to before. So an easy one to think about is when we went from using horses as our main means of transportation to having cars.
Sure.
That was an inflection point that changed human history. And so I feel like this is another one of those inflection points that provides us opportunities. And so as soon as it happened, I said, people are going to want to know what's coming next.
Yeah.
So we sat down at M+A and said, okay, let's come up with just our forecasts and our predictions. And we came up with an entire presentation that we gave to over 600 people to try to just give them some ideas. We talked about behavioral changes. We talked about space changes.
Yeah.
So that was fun and exciting.
Yeah.
And then my coworker, Sam, she's the director of communication, said, why don't we start a podcast too amidst all of this and be able to share the innovations and insights that are happening. So we try to do a lot of things that were positively focused. And so for me, for the pandemic, working at home was great. It was a good break. It was a good way to kind of like reset priorities.
Sure.
Definitely focusing a lot more on running and getting outside. But also then, like I said, prioritizing what's important. So making sure that I have the good work-life balance.
Yep.
So it's been fun and interesting to try to study, what's coming next and looking at the indications of what happened in past pandemics and what it might mean for our future.
Yeah.
And getting to educate our clients on that, because I think the clients are still in this very questioning stage of like, what is the right direction? And so just being able to help them understand human behaviors and guide them towards those solutions. So it's been fun and exciting while also very sober and trying to support one another and support the community too.
I feel like I have so many questions now.
That was a lot. I just kind of...
No, but I loved it. I feel like, okay, first, just with all of this, I guess, what were some of the biggest struggles you felt like you were helping your clients work through? Because I feel like that can be very relatable to a lot of people. I have my own that like I feel like I worked through, or with the customers I was working with worked through. What were some of the ones that you kind of saw most frequently? And what was some good guidance and advice you had kind of moving them through that?
So I think if we think about this in terms of workplace design, the big question was, am I shrinking my footprint? Is my real estate staying? What do I need to do with that?
Yeah.
So just talking them through with that, yes, you're still going to need space. We are still creatures of wanting to be together with each other. We still need that for engagement and for productivity purposes too.
Sure.
So that was one of the main questions in terms of, learning and education. Like, what does that look like? How does distance learning play out? Even more so with the technology. What does the future of the corporate campus experience look like and want to be like? For multifamily, just trying to figure out like how we can make spaces that are more flexible. But a lot of the other conversations that were really interesting and I was really happy to have, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. They were talking about mental wellness, that, what was one of the best things that I think has come out of the pandemic is we are all more aware of our mental health and more aware of respecting other people's mental health too.
Absolutely.
And so it's made our CEOs and the people we're working with be okay with adding things like, so we have a prototypical respite room that we introduce into all of our workplace projects that's
awesome.
Is designed to calm the central nervous system down from like a panic attack to your normal state of calm in under 30 minutes. And so before the pandemic, we were having these conversations and doing studies on this and research. And a lot of the clients were like, yeah, I get it, but maybe not so much. And now they're like, yeah, that's great. Let's do it. Let's 100%. Put in 3, versus just doing 1.
We need 1 in every corner of the building. Let's do that.
Exactly. So the evolution of the question has been really great to see it go from just about space to also including, all of those other components too.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, like hearing you kind of say that, and it feels like, yeah, you're right. 100%. We needed to kind of go from like the evolution of the workplace, I feel like has taken so long, but it's gone from like, very factory based to then putting people in these workplaces, but not changing that factory based model. And that's the same way our schools have been working. And in my past life, I worked in education. And so I was like seeing the change happening there, but it's so exciting to feel like it's happening in the workplace, and well-being and all of that kind of be the center of, let's make everyone happier at work, because you're here a lot.
Well, and I mean, the other factor of it is that it used to be we would just say, okay, you're in marketing, and so this is what you need because you're a marketer.
Sure.
And now, again, the employers are much more aware of there's two parts to an employee that we dive into when we're creating their workplace persona. It's, okay, yes, this is their job, this is their tasks that they perform, but this is what they need on like their actual basic human behavioral level, down to, are they an introvert to an extrovert, down to they need more heads down space because that's just the way that they work.
Sure, absolutely. So I wanted to touch on, you're a futurist.
Yes.
What does that mean, and how have you applied it not only to your work life, but just life?
So I think the easiest way to understand it is, most designers would probably understand trend forecasting.
Sure.
Where people look at all of the different signals that are things that are happening, whether it's a common color palette, whether it's a common texture, whether it's a common design principle. And then we forecast that out in terms of saying, okay, that's going to be a trend. So you could think about biophilia, which is started as a trend and it become biophilia principles, which is now part of LEED and part of WELL and all of that kind of stuff. So those trends impact how we create space and design. So as a futurist, what I do is I look at what I call signals and drivers. And so the drivers are the big world factors that are forcing change. So that could be climate change as a driver. It could be the gig economy is a driver. And then we look for the signals, which are the little micro things that happen underneath that are part of that change. So if we're looking at climate change, it would be like Greta Thunberg, and how we're seeing a lot more of the younger generations be a part of the sustainable movement. It could be, I think it was GM announced that they're going to all electric cars by 2030, the AIA 2030 commitment. So those are all signals, part of it. So I take all of that, plus look at it through the lens of history and say, okay, if all of these things are true, then these are the potential avenues that can come out from that.
Okay.
And so it's not really a prediction. It's about just saying, here are the forecasting the potential avenues. And so what we're doing is we're incorporating that foresight into all of our projects now, so that we can future set our clients so that they can pre-experience their space and their needs from 5 to 10 years down the road.
It's amazing.
And then in my own personal life, as my husband would like to say, I can never tell him what's coming down the pike because he says that's an unfair advantage to have. And so from a personal standpoint, it's just, there's a lot of reading that I do, and there's a lot of tools that I use to help gather those signals and drivers to make sure that I'm just aware of things. And it's just fun to then bring up in conversation with my friends to be like, did you see, like, NFTs is the new signal that I'm looking at right now, which is non-fungible tokens, which is how they sold the first like Twitter and how they are selling like GIFs and other things like that. So it's this new bartering system of these digital media tokens.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I feel like too, that's like such a rabbit hole. You're like, I will be busy for the rest of my life just reading about this because there's got to be so much out there.
You have to have a love for it though.
Oh, for sure. So kind of, transitioning back to work, or even for the future student, what is a myth or something you'd like to debunk about maybe even working at a larger firm, or just kind of about the work life?
So what I think, a lot of students may come into the higher education system have seen HGTV, or some kind of program like that, and I would like to just debunk that is not
shiplap.
Never
you
happens.
Don't use shiplap.
If somebody says shiplap one more time,
you don't put that on every project.
No.
Sorry, Joanna. I'm sure you're listening.
But here's the thing: it has its place,
Sure.
And so you have that kind of stuff. It just has to be in line with the project and in line with the client. What I want them to understand is that there's a lot of things to it, and there's a lot of aspects you can be as a designer. You can be the technical person where you're doing drawings and you are so passionate about like how everything fits together. That's part of it too, like doing the actual documentation. You can be the renderer or coming up with a concept perspective that shows the actual vision so that a client can understand it and perceive that. But there's a huge process that I think a lot of students might have come into their schooling thinking it's going to be easy, and there's just a lot of work that goes along into it. And the other thing that I would say is that it's not just about picking. One of my very first bosses in Columbus was David Cook at Design Collective, and he told me we don't pick things, we select things.
Sure.
And so we select things that are right for the project and right for the client based off of their needs. And it's not about us. It's not about like what we want to create too.
Oh, absolutely. Very eloquently said.
Thank you.
Because I feel like I've said something similar, just not as nicely. I'm like, ugly still sells, so just
Well, I
keep
figured we're
moving.
being recorded and videoed, so I want to make sure.
You're like, I'm going to say it nicely.
For
so it's gonna be
posterity
great.
purposes, afterwards we can talk about it.
Exactly. We do push up left where it needs to be. It's fine. When it comes to like the resources you use daily, do you have like a top 3 resources? What are they and kind of what do they look like? And if you have more than 3 you want to talk about, that's fine too.
So for materials, furniture, or just for inspiration, or for...
I think all of the above. Maybe if you want to tap into a couple of like what you use to help with specifying, maybe where you go to get inspiration for some projects, or maybe someone who just you go to for like cutting edge of like what's next.
Sure. So what I would say is if I'm looking for like my signals and trends and my forecast stuff, I am getting email blasts from like Fast Company and from Wired and from cultural sources, from art gallery openings, from political sites, from all these other things. That's how I'm gathering all of those signals. So just what I would say as a designer, you need to think outside of the design world bubble. That's a filter bubble that we get trapped in a lot, and we want to make sure we're breaking out of that. For actual inspiration for projects, I use my Instagram account. Who I follow are the people that I want to be inspired by, but it's not like Interior Design Magazine, even though they are one of them. But it's like creative council or craft council or like people who are the makers and the doers, just so I can find out what are the other things happening in the world to bring in that perspective. One good tool for actual materials is Material Bank that a lot of us are using these days, especially with the pandemic. But what I love about it is being able to search. You know, if you go into the design library, that's one thing. You're usually going in there now because you know what you need to find and you know where to get it from. But if I just wanted to get a bunch of random materials to check out and try out, that's a good resource for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, Material Bank's huge. And I feel like we just, as a company, joined Material Bank, so I'm like just now learning. And they are sorcery and wizardry is happening. You get it in like a day. It's crazy.
I know. And it's sustainable too, which I love.
Yeah, so great. So we've talked a lot about work. So I wanted to ask, what is something that you do outside of work that kind of keeps your creative juices flowing, that makes you tick from a creative person inherently? Because I feel like sometimes that gets lost in this business, is that a lot of us that work in the interiors, in the building industry, are inherent really big creators, and we love to be creative. And I feel like everyone has something outside of work that they do that people don't know about.
I agree. I think most designers that I know have a side hustle of some kind.
And I love it.
My side hustle is I write.
That's amazing.
So I have written and published a book, all self-published. It is all about Norse mythology. It's on Amazon right now. And I had used the pandemic to write book 2. So I'm in the middle of getting that edited and published right now. So if you want to check it out, it's the Asgardian Exchange. You can search for my name, Mark Bryan, on Amazon, and it'll come right up.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but it's my way to so there's no VE process to it other than what the editor says. So I get to go full tilt crazy with my ideas. And then they pull me back in terms of like, okay, maybe this consistency thing didn't work out the way I thought it would. So let's save that for the future. Or your sentence structure doesn't make sense. That to me is an acceptable VE, value engineering process for me versus it being like, cut out this whole thing.
Right, we're removing chapters. You're like, well, no.
Right, exactly.
They need to be there.
Yeah.
And then I guess, if you were in my shoes, is there anything else that you would have asked that I might have missed?
Oh.
Or anything great that's out there that you want to make sure the world of building and then whoever else on Spotify finds us needs to know about?
You know, I think if we're couching this towards students and young designers, the one thing that I would say is that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess something up. The thing that you need to do is you need to learn from it. You need to correct it, and you also need to own up to it too, because I think it's going to show a judge of your character of if you're able to say, okay, you know what, I made this mistake, but here are the solutions that I've come up with to rectify it. Here's how I think we can move going forward versus just sitting and wallowing it. I remember the first time I made a mistake and I thought my world was ending, and you know the best thing that I did is I went up to my boss and I said, look, here's where I'm at with this right now. Here's the reasons why. Here's how I got there. Help me understand. And again, finding a mentor and a boss and who is a teacher who's willing to teach you is extremely important, because he used that as a teaching moment versus a critical moment. And that is something that I use now for when I'm working with other junior designers. And I'm like, oh, look, by the way, this is great. Let's also think about like X, Y, and Z, because we all learn through the institution of talking to each other, and we all learn on the job.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%.
That bell curve of knowledge of coming out of college is insane to go through. But it's necessary and it's important, and it'll give you a good foundation if you can just have that in your brain and be like, you know what, I'm human. It's okay to make mistakes, but we're going to learn from them together.
Yeah. And then before we finish up completely, what's the podcast that M+A has come out with? I want to make sure, why not plug all of the things?
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said it. So so the podcast is called Make It Innovative,
cool.
Where we feature, today and tomorrow's innovations from, now to 3-5 years ahead, as they pertain to like the built environment. But then also we've covered mental health. We just recorded one about the Columbus Fashion Alliance.
Very cool.
And then we're getting ready to do one with some of our CSRs, our corporate social responsibility partners, to talk about like what they are, what their values are. Because I think the other thing that came out of the pandemic is that people are much more aligned with what their values are. And so we as M+A Architects firmly believe in giving back and supporting. And so those are also some of the guests that we incorporate on our podcast. So we're in season 2 right now.
That's amazing.
And have had a lot of tremendous great feedback. We are downloaded in all of the continents, which is crazy to me.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
but it's really great, and it's just been a good inspiration for ourselves and for our clients.
For sure.
So
and
check
I'm assuming it's on Spotify, all the things.
Spotify, Stitcher, all of the things. Yep.
Love it.
And if you listen to it already, leave us a review. Leave this podcast a review because it's good to know feedback.
100%. Love some good feedback.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that's all we had. Check us out on our next episode. We look forward to talking with you guys again.
Thanks much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mark.